Well, Jason, as the operational excellence manager at Abbott, is an absolute honor to have you on today. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm excited to talk to you about developing high caliber teams. I got a handful of questions for you. You came recommended for this topic, and I know you've got some passion and expertise to share. And so I wanted to kick things off with my first question here, which is really just about what it is. What is it about really the best teams that kind of separate themselves from the rest? So can you help me kind of carve out the differences there? It's like the question of, well, what does good look like, right?
Sure.
So
Yeah. So, I mean, I tend to think in bullet points, right? So, thinking about the question, there's about four things I would say uh, to narrow it down, right? Number one, I think high performing or high caliber teams deliver consistently, and I'm not just talking about great results in short periods over time, right? They've got some longevity to them. I'd say second, there's something innate within their culture where they're not satisfied with where they are
hmm,
today as they measure it against yesterday. They've got it. They understand their mission and their purpose. They want to continue to raise the bar against themselves, right? And they take it serious. They want to be the best at what they do,
mm-hmm,
and that comes from within that team, right? It's not something that's being pushed on them from an external force, right?
mm-hmm,
It resonates with them. I think another symptom of these high developing teams is that the leaders in the organization at all levels are empowered,
hmm,
right? Everyone to use a Coach Fleck ism, right? Like everyone is rowing the boat in that same direction, right? It doesn't matter what level of the organization, the buy-in, there's wholesale buy-in into where the team is going. And then lastly, and I think this one's really important. I think high developing teams weather adversity effectively.
hmm.
When you think about the business environment or whatever, right? There's factors we don't control, the things that happen to us.
Sure.
Prior to my time in the operations side of the house, I was an Army officer, and there's a lot of focus on leadership development there. In the military, we tend to laugh at adversity a little bit of dark humor sometimes, but um, you know, we pull together during those tough times versus pulling apart, right? And I think that any team can look great when everything's going their way, right? But when there's lots of headwinds and challenges, right? How that team behaves during those times will tell you everything you need to know about that team.
Yeah. Yeah, you're making me think about just the philosophy, and there's different philosophies out there when times are tough
Mhm.
of hey, should we, make some cuts or should we keep the team whole?
Mm.
But then the whole team maybe suffers through whatever it is. And they all kind of take a
Mhm.
hit.
Yep.
So versus, the team smaller.
Yeah. Long term planning versus short term planning.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I'm a big fan, and I know we're going slightly off topic here, but I think it's the philosophy behind it is interesting
Mm.
to keep the team as whole as you can for as absolutely long as you can. When that high caliber team is going through whatever rough spot
Mhm.
together, keep them whole.
Yeah, I agree. As often as possible, right? Like it's hard to forge a team
Yep.
and get them to that level. So I mean, if you're able to do so, you want to protect that,
Yep.
right? And for as long as possible.
Yeah, it's like once you got a good thing going, keep it going,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
Right.
So then let's talk about if that's the end game, let's
Mhm.
talk about how to get there. And so before we hit record, I was kind of laying out these two scenarios that I had in my mind that I see members face all the time. It's like, hey, I parachuted into this team, I got this new position. And over the last, 2, 3 years, there's been a lot of jockeying for positions,
Mhm.
a lot of leaders moving around. And so they're coming into a new team and they're looking to develop a high caliber team, or in some cases, they're maybe moving up, and so the team is already there, and now they're kind of new to their leadership position, and so they just want to take what's a good team and make it high caliber.
Mhm.
Can you kind of map out in any way, shape, or form that you'd like your experiences and what you've done to develop that high caliber team in one of those scenarios?
Sure. So I think generally speaking, right, regardless of what scenario, whether you're in a place where you've got some flexibility to build your own team, or you're, like you said, parachuting into one that exists. before you do anything with the team, I think step one is as the leader, find the closest mirror and go spend some time in front of it. Um, you know, leading, being a leader is about people, and leadership is all about relationships and building trust, because no one's going to choose to follow you if they don't trust you, right? And they're not going to, and they're not going to be able to really forge that trust unless you've got some degree of self-awareness, right? I've been in leadership about 20 years, pushing 20 years, and I'm as fallible as they come. I've got all sorts of shortcomings and weaknesses and gaps and blind spots.
I'll ask you about those later.
Yeah, can't wait. I try to be pretty aware of those, though, because unchecked, they'll hurt the team, right? And they'll hurt my relationships with those people. So understanding where I'm starting from is pretty important. It's also important, I think, if you've ever heard that phrase, do as I say, not as I do.
Ooh, yes.
No team wants to work for a hypocrite, right? So you've got to be able to hold yourself to the same standard or better that you're going to ask out of the people you're leading.
Yep.
So I think that's where you start, right? And then assuming you've got that kind of behind you, right, or that's in progress, right? I actually like parachuting into teams. I think, trying to construct something from scratch is easier, right? When you can just hire all the people you like. When I was in the Army, right, we use the phrase, you fight with the team you have, right?
Yep.
You don't get to pick who you got. So,
Yep.
and that takes a lot more, I think, emotional maturity out of the leader to establish those relationships, find all the different starting points of that particular team, and find what's working with that team and then what isn't working with that team, and then creating a plan that fits that team and doesn't blow it up. So, and I think there's a couple ways that you can do that. I think there's an organizational approach that's important, where you take that team and you articulate your mission or your purpose, right? I think everyone on a team should be able to say why their team exists.
Yep.
What's the value add of your team and what they do.
Yep.
And I think and I've had teams, I had one in particular, right, years ago. I took over the team. There was some disarray from a previous leader. And I gave it about 30 days, and I just observed, and I just watched and just asked questions. But that was one of the questions I asked, like, what's our mission? Like, how do we add value?
Yep.
And I couldn't get an answer,
Ooh.
right? And I was like, well, I mean, if you guys can't answer that question, right, like, what's everybody else think, right? So, we spent some time on that. And about 40 to 45 days or so after, I ran an exercise with them, and that's the first thing we did is we drafted a mission statement, a forward-looking one, right? I gave them some criteria. I'm like, it needs to meet these things, forward-looking, and
Okay. So it's aspirational.
a little bit, yeah,
Yep.
right. Like, but what? Why are we here? What are we doing for the company, right? How do we, when people ask us what our focus is, like, what are we going to tell them? And we did that, and it was great, and it was a really strong mission statement. But from there, then we were able to identify then what our core competencies were, or in our key processes. What's the 3 to 5 things? The list is always longer than that, right? But what's the stuff, if you boiled it down at an absolute, absolutely has to happen with this team, right, for it to meet that mission or purpose. And then from there, right, once you have those identified, you can start mapping skills. What do we need to be good at to do those things, right? And now you've got half the work done on a development plan, right?
Yeah.
And like how to really forge collective skill building, right, within the team. So I think that you start with the organization first, but in parallel, you're also doing that at the individual level, right?
So to recap, mission first, capabilities second, skills third. You got any examples that come to mind around that mission part of it?
Yeah. So, when 2016ish, right, I became the ops training manager at Boston Scientific, right? And I had this great team. It was four individuals, collective experience with the company over 100 years.
Yep.
I mean, they knew the place inside and out. I ran that exercise with them. We drafted this mission statement, and then walked it into their core competencies. The depth of knowledge they had around our training system. We had some electronic training systems, our manufacturing electronic system, just our production floors in general.
Yep.
The who's who, the leads, the operators, right? Just they knew, they had their knowledge was so deep, but we had done organizationally a really bad job of pulling that information out of them, right? So that we could leverage it to enable operations. So that's where we started, right? Well, let's start with us.
Yep.
And let's get our little nucleus, right, pulled in nice and tight and understand what we do and what we don't do,
Yep.
right? And then from there, we started to work out into those core processes, right? We ran orientation, right? We were the primary trainers. We established a train the trainer program, right, to start to certify trainers on the floor because that was a little Wild West-ish, right? Depending on who you got paired with and the standards surrounding that, right? So we identified these things that we thought we should be doing. Some of them we were, some we weren't. Then we looked at where our skill sets landed. And so we did some cross-training, right? We had pockets of things, and so we wanted to create continuity within the team versus, specialists and single points of failure.
Yep.
And then from there, we charted a forward-looking plan. Like, how do we take that core and then map that onto an organization that's looking forward, right? What does that look like for supporting a growing business or whatever, and we ended up, developing this 3-year strategy, right? And then that was what we used as, kind of our check and adjust point, right? As we were
I love
progressing.
it. Because that's, as you've got the nucleus figured out, mostly, then you look at feeder systems coming in, you're thinking, how do we protect and then grow the nucleus of the high caliber team?
Yep.
It does kind of feed into the next question I wanted to ask you, which was centered on, well, if you're a team player, not a team leader, what's your role in developing a high caliber team? So is that where people start to plug in, well, hey, I could help train the next person or the new person we just hired? How else can a team member help develop that high caliber team? In addition to maybe even just thinking about, their role in the high caliber team.
Yeah, I'd start by saying, you don't have to be the quote unquote boss to be a leader. If people come to you and ask for your expertise or asking for guidance or direction from you, like, they're already looking at you with some leader. They've already endowed that to you, right? They trust you as a leader. They're willing to follow you. That's why they're asking you for direction.
Yep.
So it has less to do with positional authority, right? And kind of your own mastery of whatever your space is. So if you're a team member and you're the SME for something, you're going to be looked at as a leader in that space. It may come in, certain times, right? Like, there's certain people who, they're great in crisis, right? And when the chips are down and you're in crisis mode again, that's when people come to you, right? Like, that's your opportunity to step up and lead. So I think there's a piece where the individual kind of has to recognize when their skill set kind of fits the bill to be called upon, right?
Yeah.
And then from there you just step up, I'd say. But on a consistent basis, right? Like, you should try to embody and be the change that you want to see in others, right? So, leading by example is the phrase we would use, most typically, right? But just doing what you would like to see other people do helps, right? Going back to that kind of do as I say, not as I do thing, right? If your behavior is consistent and you consistently meet or exceed your standard, right, and you're holding the line on those expectations really well, and you're accountable to yourself, right? Because no one gets it right all the time, right? But it's how you respond when you miss. When you're accountable for yourself, and people see that, right? That builds trust. Going back to that previous statement I made, right? And and leadership's based on trust. So, anyone can do that.
Yep.
You don't have to have an office,
Right.
to do that. Or business cards. That anyone on the team can step up and take on that role.
So let's talk a little bit about results. You kind of mentioned this in the beginning, like, long-term perspective, we're hitting goals. What else would you say are some of the results that are typical for high caliber teams in your experience?
Yeah. So from my experience, I think there's probably a couple of different categories. They're kind of broad. But I think the one term I would use is holistic, right? They're good across the board. Not perfect across the board, but they're good across the board. And what I mean by that is there is a connection to what's valuable to their customer, right? We all have a customer somewhere. They understand what their customer wants from them, and they do it well. I think that if you look, think of like voice of customer and then voice of business, which I've heard that. I like that phrase.
Yep.
There is value added stuff that maybe the customer's not willing to pay for, but it is important to the business longevity, right, and the health of the organization. So, kind of understanding that secondarily, right. So we know how to make our customers happy and deliver to them, right. We understand what's important to the business and the long term viability of the organization and our job. and in our careers and things like that, we're able to operate in a way that kind of promotes the sustainability of the organization forward. And then the last one's a little harder, I think, to nail down. Culture, right? It's the soft stuff that's not as tangible from a measurement standpoint, right? But there's something in the fabric of the people there, right? That however you want to measure it, like it's healthy.
Yeah.
I've been working on a leadership model for years, and on one of the it's a triangle, right? But on one side of the triangle, there's on the people component. I chose the word compassion. And the example, I got that from one of my teams directly. It was during kind of the COVID lockdowns, and I don't know, I'm sure you remember when like the essentials only thing and like the highways were wide open. You could actually get to work in a decent time.
I remember that, yeah.
The company I was with at the time offered a kind of like a retention bonus, right, to keep coming to work, because at that point it was really early on in COVID, and we still weren't sure like what it was and how dangerous it really was, right?
Yep.
So some people were getting scared to come to work and things like that. So there was a retention bonus paid to our operators across the company. It was a really nice thing that they did. However, it only applied to our full-time folks, right? And we had a contingent component. And what my operators did, and we weren't a very big team, but what my operators did is they all donated into a pile, because I think we only had about a handful or so, 5 to 10, contingent workers. But they all donated and took donations from their own bonuses that they got, right? And then subdivided that and gave it to their peers that were on the contingent side.
Wow.
And this
That's
team,
nice.
it was amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't know that they were going to do that. I got kind of caught off guard by it. It was amazing. And then when they presented that to their teammates, right? Because regardless of where their paycheck was coming from, they didn't seem as any different. They were part of the team, and they were just as important to our success. And the one thing I would give that team, is sometimes they would fight like siblings, but when the chips were down, they took care of each other, right? And they had genuine compassion for each other, right? They treated each other like people. And so I took a lot from that team, right? And that really kind of forms, I think when you start to talk about what makes great teams, behind the results and the tangible stuff and all the operational stuff and all that, right? It's an organization of people that genuinely have some level of care or compassion for each other, and they take care of each other.
I was talking to a director at 3M one time, and they were talking about cultures and team health, and then measurements. How do you measure it? And it was kind of the classic, like, sometimes it can be a little difficult because it's soft and fluffy. And he told me that, and this was 3M, they would measure smiles, daily smiles. And he would just kind of do the visual check and be like, hey, Jason, great to see that smile today. I'm like, whoa. And then he was like, okay, I got one. And tallying it up.
That's a great one. Actually, I was thinking about this on the way over, right? Like one of the things that I do look for, I don't have a great rubric for measuring it, right? But one of the things I look for is sense of humor. Like how often are people laughing?
Yeah.
I've been in environments where their scorecard is technically pretty green and they're doing well, but there's nobody laughing, right? Like it's a grind. So, are we able, I think to your point, right? Are people able to keep their sense of humor?
Yeah.
Right. And keep things relatively light, regardless of the circumstances? I think tells you an awful lot.
Yeah. Sometimes leaders can get in the way of those results and aren't maybe the best role model. On a personal note, here at the Alliance, every Friday we get together and we review the CIs that have been completed for the week. It's a good communication tool to keep up with changes, and then I think what you encourage and recognize, you get more of, and it's improvement. Who doesn't want more of that? But I always just But I always just look at, and then we have different themes. I don't know how this happened, but with the theme this year, I ended up as Pikachu. So I'm always just looking for Pikachu on the left-hand side. Like, okay, great, I got a couple on there. So I'm like, not only am I, doing, my job, which is improvement, but I'm also being a good example, right?
Right.
And so just in that small way, I'm not like a barrier, because I know people are watching, like, okay, who's doing what out there? But what have you seen that is maybe something that leaders have done that gets in their own way and really prevents a high caliber team from either forming or performing? Anything there?
Yeah. Are you familiar with the book Extreme Ownership?
Yes.
All right, love that. I love that book. And the follow up to it, Dichotomy of Leadership. There's some really good things in there, and for newer leaders, it's a very practical book on leadership, right? But one of the things the authors Leif Babin and Jocko Willink call out, right?
Yeah.
Ego.
Mm.
Probably the one thing that gets in a leader's way or gets in between them and their team more often than anything is ego. Honestly, sometimes the best thing a leader can do is just get out of the way, be quiet and get out of the way. If you've hired smart people, they're talented folks. You don't need to constrain their talent with all of your opinions on how things should be done. Sometimes just letting them operate and giving them some freedom of movement is really all they need, right? And if you take care of them and you show them through that action, right, that you're trusting them,
Yeah.
right? Most often, I mean, I've been rewarded for that, right?
Yeah.
They go do great things and we have good results and we get to celebrate and things like that. So sometimes the leader's job is just to not get in the way, right? When the team understands what they need to do.
Or it's your job to celebrate or organize the celebration now.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually was thinking about how often I've been a bottleneck. Have you ever felt like you're the bottleneck sometimes to greater and greater performance?
Yeah, at times. Yeah.
And even this year, I thought, gosh, there's been a couple of instances where I just handed over the keys and I'm like, you got this. Take the car for a drive and I'll see you later.
Right.
But it's been nice to just really see what others are fully capable of on their own.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something that we learned, as part of our leader development in the military, right? So if you think about kind of general conceptual military, right? You don't want a general hundreds of miles away making tactical calls on the ground somewhere, right? So the military's leadership model is very much decentralized, right? We develop leaders at all levels, right? And we're trusting the people on the ground. We've given them tools and skills to be able to read the situation consistently, right? We have standards for stuff like that and process and SOPs. But you got to trust what the people on the ground see and say, right? So, and leaders in the military have a lot of autonomy. Especially in those sorts of environments, right, where calls need to be made now, and health and safety is potentially at risk or certainly a consideration, and so taking that and then transposing that onto the business world and things like that, the same as possible, right? If I'm a site director, I may not know at any given time what is best for a certain team on the floor, right? Because I can't plug in often enough,
Right.
to stay on top of it.
Right.
So that's the one thing, like, as you kind of graduate up that leadership ladder, right, to more and more senior roles, right, the detail you have on what's going on the ground is harder to obtain, right? And so you end up kind of swooping in for snapshots versus living in it, right? And in order for that organization to continue to have momentum going forward, you've got to be able to trust the people there and know when to back out of it.
Is that how you learn to let go? It's almost like you had to because they have better data, better experiences. They're closer to the work and the customer at that point in time.
Yeah, and if you're being honest with yourself, you're going to know that I'm probably not the right person to make this call.
Yeah.
Right. So do I really have the right stuff to make the call, or is it my ego wanting me to make the call?
Right.
And so being able to kind of go back to the mirror and put myself in check and understand, like, I need to let this one go to the team. And what I've found to be pretty effective, right, is giving them guidance, right, or criteria. Like, I'm not going to tell you how to do it, but here's what has to happen. Here's kind of the standard we're looking for, the timeline. Here's what we're trying to meet. This is the end state that we're trying to get to. Build the context for them, and then let them unleash their talent and excellence, right?
Yes, I love that. Like, here's the outcome. Here's the direction we're going. And I'm super curious about how best we can get there with your skills.
Yep.
Yeah, love it. That's the perfect note to end on, Jason. Thank you so much for talking to me about how to develop high caliber teams.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was great.
All right, I got 3 more questions for you. Okay. And so I wanted to have some fun, but also see if you could drop some nuggets for everybody listening. Tell me what's your biggest leadership pet peeve?
Indecision.
Ooh. So, like, if I just sit here too long and twiddle my thumbs and think about it too long, it's going to drive you nuts, huh?
Yeah. So, I mean, I took that as, like, pet peeves of leaders. That I've either seen my own leaders or whatever. But yeah, I think it's a leader's job to make decisions, and tough ones. That's why they have the responsibility. So, lack of forward progress, kind of spinning our wheels or chewing on the same data we've had now for days or weeks or something like that. And
Yep.
like that, drives me
Yep.
nuts.
Yep. 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 Okay. Advice to your younger self. What would it be?
Enjoy the journey.
Mm.
So, type A type of guy. I like to deliver results. I like continuous improvement stuff. It's pretty easy to get fixated on the destination
Yeah.
and kind of miss the fun and the journey along the way.
Yeah.
So there's certain things, if I could go back and do that again, right, I would be far more present and enjoying, the good and the bad, the
Yep.
struggles, you learn a lot from that too, but
Yep.
being more present on the journey.
I can so relate. Your words just resonate with me so much more now that I'm 40.
You learn a lot, tell you what. I'd like to say I've grown up a lot. My wife might disagree, but
That's awesome. Okay, what's one skill every great leader should have?
listening.
Hmm.
You have 2 ears and 1 mouth. I think you should use them in that proportion. Your team is a wealth of intel and information, right? But you're not going to get it if you don't listen to them.
Yeah.
So, if they trust you, especially if you've done that much, right? If you're able to let them kind of lead a lot of those discussions, the insight they'll give you into your operation, you'd never get by yourself.
Yep. Yep. Jason, this is a ton of fun again. Thank you.
Yeah, that was a great time. Thanks.
All right.